I still remember the exact moment my life split in two, before that night and after it. It was raining, one of those quiet, gray Tuesday nights when nothing feels wrong, until everything is. I wasn't supposed to be on that street. I didn't even know why I turned there. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something I'd been ignoring for months, finally forcing itself to the surface. And then I saw it. His car, parked in front of a house I didn't recognize, on a street I'd never been to, at a time when he had told me, without hesitation, "I'm still at the office, honey. Don't wait up." I sat there behind the wheel, engine running, rain tapping the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I just stared at that car, at his license plate, the one I knew by heart after 9 years of marriage, and I thought, if I drive away right now, I can still pretend I don't know. But I didn't drive away, and that decision changed everything. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and subscribe, because every week we bring you real stories about love, betrayal, and the strength it takes to start over. Don't miss a single chapter. Turn on the bell notification so you never watch alone. I used to believe that a good marriage was something you could feel in the small things. The way your husband reaches for your hand during a movie without thinking about it. The way he remembers you don't like cilantro, even after 9 years. The way he says drive safe every single morning, like a reflex, like breathing. Dean was that kind of man. At least that's who I thought he was. We met in college, 2 kids from different worlds who somehow made sense together. He was studying finance. I was studying graphic design. We used to joke that he handled the numbers, and I handled everything that made life beautiful. It worked. For a long time, it really worked. We got married on a Saturday in October, under a sky so blue it looked painted. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina. Nothing fancy, but ours. We planted a garden in the backyard that neither of us really knew how to maintain, but we tried anyway, every spring, because that's what you do when you're building something together. We didn't have children yet. We had talked about it, carefully, the way you talk about something that matters too much to rush. We wanted to be ready. We wanted the timing to be right. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first crack neither of us named. Because somewhere between the garden we kept replanting and the family we kept postponing, Dean and I had quietly drifted into routine. Not the comfortable kind, the invisible kind. The kind where you stop seeing each other and start just coexisting. Dinner at 7. Television until 10. Lights out. I told myself it was normal. I told myself every long-term couple went through phases like this. I read articles about it. I even bookmarked a few marriage retreats, thinking maybe in the spring we could get away, reconnect, remember why we chose each other. I never booked any of them. Dean started working longer hours about 8 months before that rainy Tuesday night. At first it made sense. He had been promoted to senior financial analyst at his firm, and the new role came with real pressure. I supported him. I kept dinner warm. I stopped asking what time he'd be home because I didn't want to add to his stress. I was proud of him. That's the part that still stings the most. While I was rearranging my own schedule to make room for his ambition, something else was quietly rearranging itself in the background of our marriage, something I wasn't supposed to see. But on a gray Tuesday night in November, with rain on my windshield and his car parked somewhere it had no business being, I saw it anyway. Everything I'm about to tell you started long before that night. I just didn't know it yet. It started with a name, not a fight, not a lipstick stain on a collar, not a suspicious text message lighting up a phone screen at midnight. Just a name, dropped casually into a Tuesday evening conversation like it meant nothing at all. We were having dinner. Pasta I had made from scratch, the kind Dean always said was his favorite. He was telling me about a project at work, something about quarterly projections and a client presentation that had been pushed back twice. I was half listening, refilling his glass, when he said it for the first time. Paula caught a mistake in the spreadsheet before it went to the client. Saved us a lot of embarrassment. Paula. I didn't think anything of it. I smiled, said something like, "That was lucky," and moved on. Dean had colleagues. Of course he did. People worked together. People caught each other's mistakes. That was normal. But then Paula came up again the following week. Paula stayed late with me to finish the Henderson report. She's really good under pressure. And again, 3 days after that. Paula thinks we should restructure the presentation format. I think she's right. I started noticing it the way you notice a song playing in a store. Not immediately, not consciously, But somewhere in the back of your mind, a pattern begins to form. Paula was efficient. Paula was sharp. Paula understood the work in a way that impressed him. He never said she was anything other than a colleague, but he never stopped mentioning her either. I told myself I was being irrational. I had no evidence of anything. A name is just a name. People talk about their co-workers. That's what adults do. I was not going to be the kind of wife who spiraled over a name, so I pushed it down. But then came the other things. The things that don't have easy explanations. His phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter every evening, started living face down. Always. Even when he wasn't near it. Even when he was in the shower and I walked past it, face down on the nightstand. Like a sleeping secret. His cologne changed. Just slightly. Not dramatically. He didn't come home smelling like a different woman, but the scent was different. Fresher. Like he had reapplied it sometime during the day. And the late nights multiplied. 2 per week became 3. 3 became 4. The explanations were always reasonable. A deadline, a client call, a team dinner. I was mentioned last minute, and then quietly uninvited from because it was really just work stuff. You'd be bored. I wasn't bored. I was paying attention. I just hadn't admitted to myself yet what I was paying attention to. Paula still had no face, but she was starting to take up space in my marriage, and I was running out of reasons to pretend otherwise. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from lying in bed next to someone and feeling completely alone. Not the loneliness of an empty house. Not the loneliness of a quiet Sunday. The loneliness of reaching for someone who is physically there, but somehow completely unreachable. The loneliness of saying, "How was your day?" and knowing, before he even answers, that the answer will be a performance. That was my life by the time October arrived. Dean was still coming home, still sleeping in our bed, still kissing me on the cheek before leaving in the morning, but something behind his eyes had shifted, something small and hard to name, like a light that had been dimmed just enough that you weren't sure if you were imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. The night I stopped believing him was a Thursday. He called at 6:30 to tell me he'd be late. Another dinner with a client, someone important, someone whose name I immediately forgot, because by then the details had stopped mattering. What mattered was the pattern. What mattered was that this was the 4th Thursday in a row. I said fine. I said okay. I said, don't work too hard, the way I always did. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with my cold pasta, and I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I told myself I was just checking emails. But within 10 minutes I had pulled up our shared credit card statement, the one we kept for household expenses, the one I hadn't looked at closely in months because I trusted him. The charges were small enough to overlook individually. A restaurant in the Noda neighborhood, a place I'd never heard of, on a Wednesday evening when he told me he'd eaten at his desk. A florist charge for $38 on a date I couldn't account for. 2 charges at a parking garage downtown on days he claimed to have worked from home. None of it was proof. I knew that. A rational person could explain every single one of those charges in 30 seconds. Lunch with a colleague, a gift for a client, a meeting that ran over. But I wasn't feeling rational anymore. I was feeling something I had been carefully avoiding for weeks. A cold, quiet certainty settling into my chest like stones dropping one by one into still water. I closed the laptop. I washed my dish. I dried it. I put it away. And when Dean came home at 10:15, smelling of that slightly too fresh cologne, I looked at him from across the kitchen, and I smiled, and I said, "I saved you a plate." He said thank you. He didn't ask how my evening was, and I stood there realizing that I had already made a decision. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. I was going to find out the truth. I am not the kind of woman who follows her husband. I need you to understand that before I tell you what I did. I was raised to believe that trust was the foundation of everything. My mother stayed married to my father for 41 years, and she always said the same thing. A relationship without trust is just 2 people performing for each other. I believe that. I built my entire marriage on that belief, and yet, on the 2nd Tuesday of November, at 6:47 in the evening, I put on my coat, picked up my keys, and followed my husband. He had called at 6:15. Same story. Working late. Big deadline. Don't wait up. His voice was calm and practiced, the way it had been for weeks. No hesitation. No guilt bleeding through the edges. Just Dean, steady and convincing, telling me exactly what he knew I needed to hear to stay home and ask no questions. But something was different that night. Maybe I was different. I waited 20 minutes after he called. Then I got in my car and drove toward his office building downtown. A 15-minute drive I had made dozens of times, dropping off forgotten lunches, picking him up when his car was in the shop. The parking lot was visible from the street. I drove past slowly. His car was not there. I sat at a red light half a block away, hands steady on the wheel, and I thought about Paula. I thought about the face-down phone. I thought about the florist charge and the parking garage and 4 consecutive Thursday dinners with clients whose names I could never remember. And then, without fully deciding to, I thought about the one time Dean had mentioned offhandedly, months ago before any of this, that Paula lived somewhere off Commonwealth Avenue. He had said it in passing, the way you mention something you don't think matters. I had filed it away without meaning to. I drove to Commonwealth Avenue. It's a long street. I didn't have an address. I told myself I was being absurd, that I would drive through once and go home and feel foolish, and that would be the end of it. I turned onto the street, and there it was, his car, parked in front of a gray 2-story house with a light on in the front window, exactly as real and undeniable as the 9 years I had given him. His license plate, his dent on the rear bumper from the parking garage incident 2 years ago that he kept meaning to fix. I stopped the car across the street. The rain was soft against the windshield. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been 2 minutes. It could have been 20. All I knew was that the woman I was before I turned onto that street no longer existed. She had disappeared the moment I read those 7 digits on that license plate. I drove home that night without crying. That surprised me. I had always assumed that if I ever discovered something like this, I would fall apart immediately, pull over on the side of the road, call my sister, sob until I couldn't breathe. That's what betrayal looks like in movies. Immediate, explosive, undeniable. But real betrayal is quieter than that. I drove home, changed into my pajamas, and got into bed. When Dean came home at 10:40, I pretended to be asleep. I listened to him move through the house, the bathroom faucet, the closet door, the familiar weight of him settling onto his side of the mattress. He was asleep in 4 minutes. I stared at the ceiling until 3 in the morning. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. Not without knowing exactly what I was dealing with. Because there was something that didn't quite fit. Something that had been bothering me since I sat across the street from that gray house on Commonwealth Avenue. Dean had been there less than an hour. I had watched his car from the moment I arrived until the moment I forced myself to leave. He hadn't stayed long. No lights went off. No intimate silhouette in the window. He had gone in and come out and driven away like a man completing a transaction, not like a man spending the evening with someone he was in love with. It was strange, and I needed to understand it. So I started watching, carefully, quietly, the way you do when you finally accept that the person sleeping beside you has become someone you need to investigate instead of trust. I began tracking his schedule without him knowing. Every morning I noted what time he left. Every evening I noted what time he returned. I cross-referenced his arrivals against the credit card statements I now checked every 3 days. I started photographing the mileage on his car, a detail so small he would never notice, but one that told me exactly how far he had driven on any given day. The pattern that emerged was precise and deeply unsettling. Dean visited Commonwealth Avenue an average of twice per week, always on weekday evenings, always between 6 and 8. Never longer than 90 minutes. He was home by 10 at the latest, every single time, like a man keeping to a schedule rather than following his heart. There were no hotel charges on the credit card, no weekend disappearances, no perfume on his clothes, but there were cash withdrawals. $300 here, $250 there, always from ATMs on the opposite side of the city from our neighborhood, always on the days he visited that house. That was the detail that changed everything. Because a man having an affair doesn't need cash. A man paying for something he's ashamed of does. I gave myself 1 week to talk myself out of it. 7 days of sitting with what I knew. The cash withdrawals, the scheduled visits, the 90-minute window that repeated itself like clockwork, and telling myself there was still a reasonable explanation, that I was constructing a story from fragments, that I owed my husband of 9 years the benefit of the doubt before I did something I couldn't undo. By the 7th day, I was done waiting. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Dean had left for work at his usual time. I had called in late to my studio, told my assistant I had a dentist appointment, and driven to Commonwealth Avenue with my hands perfectly steady and my heart somewhere in my throat. I sat outside the gray house for 10 minutes before I got out of the car. The front yard was neat. A small porch with 2 chairs. A wreath on the door that looked like it had been there since autumn. Normal. Quiet. The kind of house that reveals nothing from the outside. I walked up the front path. I knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. I stood there in the cold November air, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, wondering if I should turn around and go back to my car and my safe, collapsing life. Then the door opened. She was younger than I expected. Maybe 32, 33, dark hair pulled back. No makeup. She was wearing an oversized sweater and holding a coffee mug, and for one disorienting moment she looked so ordinary that I almost apologized for knocking on the wrong door. Then she saw my face, and she went completely pale. She knew who I was. I could see it happen in real time. The recognition, the calculation, the decision about what to do next. Her hand tightened around the mug. Her eyes moved past me to the street, checking, the way someone checks when they're afraid of being seen. I said my name. I told her I was Dean's wife. She didn't deny knowing him. She didn't pretend to be confused. She just stood there in the doorway looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. I had prepared for anger. I had prepared for tears, for slammed doors, for the kind of confrontation you see in television dramas. I had prepared for her to be everything I had imagined an other woman to be. I had not prepared for what she actually said. She stepped back from the door. She looked at me for a long moment, and then, quietly, with something that sounded almost like relief, she said, "He didn't tell you, did he?" It wasn't a question. I felt the ground shift beneath me, not the shift of confirmation. I had been bracing for confirmation for weeks. This was different. This was the shift of realizing that the story I had been telling myself was not the right story at all. "Tell me what?" I said. She looked down at her coffee mug. Then she looked back up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had not expected to find on the other side of that door. She wasn't the woman who had stolen my husband. She was someone who had been waiting, maybe even hoping, for me to show up. "You should come inside," she said. And I did. I sat down on a couch that wasn't mine, in a house I had spent weeks dreading, and listened to a woman I had imagined as my enemy tell me a story that made my husband into someone I didn't recognize. Paula, because that was her name, Paula Hendricks, didn't sit down immediately. She stood by the window for a moment, like she was deciding how much to say and in what order. Then she set her coffee mug on the table, folded her hands, and told me everything. It had started 7 months ago. Dean had made a mistake at work. Not a small one. He had signed off on a series of financial documents that contained irregularities, transfers between project accounts that weren't authorized, numbers that had been quietly shifted to cover a budget shortfall he had been too proud to report to his superiors. He hadn't stolen anything. Paula was careful to say that, but he had falsified records. He had made the books look clean when they weren't. Paula had discovered it during a routine internal audit. She had gone to Dean privately before reporting it. A professional courtesy, she called it, though I could hear something harder underneath that phrase. She gave him the opportunity to come forward on his own. He didn't take it. Instead, he panicked, and a panicked man with something to hide does not make wise decisions. He had offered her money, not once, repeatedly. Cash, delivered in person. Every visit to this house a negotiation disguised as a resolution. He believed he could contain it. He believed he could buy her silence long enough to fix the records, cover the trail, make the problem disappear before anyone else looked closely. Paula let him believe that. I stared at her. "You were extorting him," I said. She didn't flinch. "I was giving him time to make the right choice," she said. "He kept making the wrong one." I didn't know what to do with that distinction. I still don't. But then she told me the part that knocked the air completely out of the room. 3 days ago, tired of waiting, tired of the cash and the visits and the slow deterioration of her own conscience, Paula had compiled everything, the original documents, the transfers, the records of every payment Dean had made to her, and sent it to the firm's compliance department. All of it. Dean didn't know yet. He was still coming to this house, still delivering envelopes, still believing he was managing a situation that had already been reported, documented, and placed in the hands of people whose job it was to act on exactly this kind of information. I sat on that couch in complete silence. My husband hadn't been having an affair. He had been quietly dismantling everything we had built, our savings, our reputation, our future, one panicked decision at a time, and he hadn't said a single word to me. The call came on a Friday morning. Dean was in the shower. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, staring at the backyard, at the garden we had planted together every spring, the one neither of us really knew how to maintain, but kept trying anyway. I was thinking about Paula's words, about documents, about compliance departments and consequences that move slowly until suddenly they don't. His work phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. I already knew. Dean came downstairs 20 minutes later, dressed for the office, tie half knotted, and I watched him pick up his phone. I watched him read whatever was on that screen. I watched the color leave his face in a way I had never seen before, not gradually, but all at once, like a light switching off. He sat down at the table across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Nicole, I need to tell you something." And I said, "I already know." The days that followed were the longest of my life. The firm launched a formal investigation within 48 hours. Dean was placed on immediate administrative leave, a quiet, professional way of saying that his badge no longer worked, and his emails were being reviewed by people he had never met. His colleagues stopped returning his calls. His supervisor, a man he had considered a mentor for 6 years, did not reach out once. By the following Wednesday, it was over. Dean was terminated. The financial irregularities were confirmed. The unauthorized transfers totaled just over $40,000. Not millions, not the kind of number that makes headlines, but more than enough to end a career and trigger a formal legal review. The firm's attorneys made clear that cooperation would be considered during any subsequent proceedings. Dean hired a lawyer of his own with money from our joint savings account, a withdrawal I discovered 3 days after it happened. Paula was also terminated. Extortion, regardless of the underlying motivation, carries its own consequences. She had known that. I think, in some way, she had accepted it long before she sent those documents. The reputation Dean had spent 15 years building collapsed in 11 days, and our marriage collapsed with it. Not in a single dramatic moment, not in a screaming match or a thrown plate, or an ultimatum delivered across a threshold. It collapsed the way trust collapses when the foundation has been quietly hollowed out. Slowly at first, then completely, then in a silence so total it was almost peaceful. I didn't throw him out. I didn't have to. One evening, Dean packed a bag, methodically, quietly, the way he did everything, and told me he was going to stay with his brother in Raleigh while things were sorted out. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched him pack. I didn't ask him to stay, and he didn't ask me to let him. The house was very quiet after Dean left. I had expected the silence to feel like a wound. I had braced myself for the kind of emptiness that follows the end of something significant. The hollow, echoing quality of rooms that used to hold 2 people and now hold only 1. I had heard other women describe it that way, like a missing limb, like reaching for something that isn't there anymore. But the silence that settled into our house after Dean drove away toward Raleigh felt different. It felt like exhaling. I didn't understand that at first. I sat with it for days, turning it over, wondering if there was something wrong with me, if the absence of devastation meant I had loved him less than I thought, or that I had already been grieving something for so long that the official ending barely registered. Then I understood. I had been holding my breath for 8 months. Every late night, every face-down phone, every cash withdrawal I hadn't questioned out loud, every time I smiled across the kitchen and said, "I saved you a plate," while something inside me was quietly screaming. Every morning I watched him leave and told myself I was being irrational, that I was paranoid, that a good wife trusts her husband. I had been tensed against a blow that had finally landed, and the strange, complicated truth was that landing it hurt less than waiting for it. My sister drove up from Columbia the weekend after Dean left. She brought groceries and wine and the particular brand of fierce, uncomplicated love that only a sibling can offer. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She just sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me everything." And I did, for the first time, out loud, from the beginning. It took 3 hours. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You knew, before you knew. You just weren't ready to know that you knew." I thought about that for a long time afterward. She was right. The signs had been there. Not of an affair, but of a man disappearing into a version of himself he was too ashamed to show me. And instead of reaching toward him, or demanding answers, or trusting my own instincts sooner, I had accommodated the distance. I had made myself smaller to fit around his secret. I was done being smaller. In the weeks that followed, I made small, deliberate changes. I rearranged the living room furniture, something I had wanted to do for years, and never did because Dean preferred things a certain way. I signed up for a pottery class on Thursday evenings. I started having dinner with friends I had slowly, almost imperceptibly, stopped prioritizing during the long months of monitoring and worrying. I was not happy. Not yet. But I was present in my own life in a way I hadn't been in a very long time, and that felt like the beginning of something. 6 months after that rainy Tuesday night, I drove down Commonwealth Avenue again. Not because I had to. Not because anything pulled me there, the way instinct had pulled me there the first time. I drove down that street deliberately, on a bright Saturday morning in May, with the windows down and the radio on, because I wanted to know if it still had power over me. It didn't. The gray house looked smaller in the daylight. Ordinary. A house like any other house on any other street in Charlotte. The wreath on the door was gone. The 2 chairs on the porch had been replaced by a single potted plant. Paula had moved out sometime in March. I didn't know where, and I found that I didn't need to know. I drove past slowly. I didn't stop. And somewhere between the beginning and the end of that block, I felt something release in my chest. Something I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. A tightness. A vigilance. The residue of 8 months spent bracing for a truth that turned out to be stranger and sadder than anything I had imagined. Dean's legal situation was ongoing. His attorney had negotiated a cooperation agreement with the firm, which had reduced the likelihood of criminal charges, but not eliminated them entirely. He was living in Raleigh. We spoke occasionally. Brief, careful conversations about practical matters. The house, the joint accounts, the slow administrative machinery of a marriage coming apart at the seams. He had apologized. Twice, in writing, and once on the phone in a voice so stripped of its usual steadiness that I barely recognized it. He said he hadn't known how to tell me. He said he had been ashamed. He said he had convinced himself he could fix it before I ever had to know. I believed him. That was the most complicated part, believing him and understanding him, and still knowing with absolute certainty that understanding someone is not the same as being able to stay. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday, the same day of the week as that first rainy night. I don't know if that was intentional. Maybe it was. Maybe some part of me needed the symmetry. What I know is this. I am not the woman who sat frozen behind that steering wheel anymore. I am not the woman who kept dinner warm and asked no questions and made herself invisible around someone else's secret. I am not the woman who confused loyalty with silence. I am someone who followed a feeling down a dark street in the rain and found the truth waiting for her on the other side. And the truth, as painful as it was, gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. It gave me back to myself. The garden in the backyard bloomed again this spring. I planted it alone for the first time. It has never looked better. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Nicole's journey, from that rainy night on Commonwealth Avenue to the moment she planted that garden alone, is a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, always gives us something back. Sometimes it gives us back ourselves. If you have a story you'd like to share, a real experience, something that happened to you or someone you love, drop it in the comments below. Your story could become our next video. Every week we bring new narratives about love, betrayal, resilience, and the courage it takes to start over. Your voice matters here. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it kept you watching until the very last word, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel. Every like tells us this work matters. Every subscriber means another person who will never have to watch alone. Hit the bell. Turn on notifications. We don't want you to miss what's coming next. And speaking of what's coming next week, we bring you the story of a woman who discovered her husband's secret, not through a feeling, not through a rainy night drive, but through a single voicemail he accidentally left on the wrong phone. One message, 37 seconds, and a marriage that was never the same again. We'll see you then.